today we're going to talk about how Anove empowers the Virtual CISO and the Virtual DPO. And we are going to address a couple of topics, basically to explain a little bit the opportunity that we have collectively. So Anove as well as you as a potential Virtual CISO or CISO as a service, or how you would like to call it. And we're going to explain a little bit on typical Virtual CISO goals for an organization in order to help these organizations in need, and also the drivers, the main drivers that you can bring. And we've distilled 3 main drivers to help organizations in the European Union, specifically focusing on Europe because of all these tech regulations. And we're going to explain a little bit on how you can scale your own business with the help of the Anove technology. So first of all, why do we do this webinar? Well, there are a couple of reasons for it, why we do this. And that's mainly because we see an upcoming need for experts. There's a talent scarcity currently of 1.2 million globally, but also specifically in the European region, we see a big demand for specific roles. And so I've published another article about the emerging roles for the future. Those are typical roles that you don't see nowadays, but they'll evolve over time. For example, the AI auditor, due to the AI Act, due to a lot of regulations where AI is involved, somebody needs to be able to support the regulator and support supervisory boards into opening up this black box, and therefore the role of the AI auditor becomes more and more important. So these emerging roles in digital security typically lead to a new demand in terms of talent. Well, new generations now, they also give other purpose to work. For example, recent publications from Forbes magazine show that the newer generation finds it important to have flexible work hours, have the ability to do workations, and want to have security of their income, but also want to earn more money with the work that they're doing. And they are also in need of a sort of an understream of recurring revenue streams for their personal income as well as their business. And there's a growing need for more what we refer to as outcome-based security rather than activity-based, and what we refer to as uurtje factuurtje. So companies more and more look at the outcome. So to what extent within a certain period can I be compliant to a specific regulation, or how can I reduce, let's say, to 95% the chance of being hit. So it's a typical outcome-based security activities that companies are more and more asking. And you also see there's a growing demand in consuming everything as a service. So less ad hoc, becomes more and more as a continuous service consumed out of cloud or consumed in a service business model. And this provides, of course, recurring and stable income streams. And that's the main reason why we as Anove built the Anove app for specifically Virtual CISO and Virtual DPOs coming up. And also because we are ourselves DPOs and CISOs, and we have suffered also the problem of not having an automated technology that can support your security and compliance processes. And so we are anticipating on a complete other workforce that we'll see in the future. And we're also anticipating on more consumption out of the cloud, where digital assurance becomes the standard. It becomes part of the license to operate for companies. But what is a virtual chief security officer or chief information security, or what's the virtual DPO? Well, basically the main characteristic of it is that the virtual CISO is a service that provides organizations with the expertise of strategic leadership of a traditional CISO, but then on a part-time contract basis, meaning that you are there, for example, once a week or once in a month, comparable to an accountant. Accountant comes in an organization, perhaps you don't need a full-time bookkeeper or a full-time financial officer, but you need to have somebody looking after your accounts. So this is typically a part-time contractual basis. And I'm going to explain a little bit the magnitude of the opportunity that we see in the European Union with the increase of amount of regulations that are coming at us. So we're currently looking at 16 to 70 new tech regulations, overwhelming the amount of European companies throughout Europe. That's the main reason why we focus on Europe. And so we have our origin in France as well as in the Netherlands. And those are typically our main markets now that we are focusing on. The thing is that without proper digital risk and security administration and oversight, boards cannot take accountability. Yeah? So they need a clear and tight security administration. We also refer to as the administrative organization, internal control, in order to demonstrate that you are capable of adhering to these regulations. And I think you all heard of a couple of these acts, but more are coming. In parallel to these tech regulations, we also see an additional item coming at us that provides both a problem as well as an opportunity, depending on how you look at it. Main important thing is that we see an increase in sophisticated attacks and espionage to steal the intellectual property of our companies. But we also see the demand, mainly due to the regulations, on the reliance on third parties and subcontractors and tech suppliers in our value chain that needs to be checked on a periodic basis on do they also adhere to the requirements that we as a company have? Because if you don't do it, you might lose your license to operate. All these new tech regulations require that boards, so the owners, take accountability. And if they don't, and they have bad practices in place, they can also be personally and liable for their malfunction, meaning that they can be disposed from their role, but also banned from the entire industry for life. That has quite some repercussions for them. So that means that they need to take more ownership, and they do. They also recognize this is a problem and potentially also an opportunity. Okay, so let's look at this opportunity. How big is it? So if we're looking at the scope of all European companies in Europe at the moment, we can make a distinction in small, micro to small organizations, mid-sized, large, and enterprise organizations, where an enterprise organization typically has the characteristics when we're looking at information security and risk management, that there are already GRC tools in place. They have dedicated staff, and they're most of the time also regulated due to the fact that they are listed companies or the fact that they are under supervision of some form of supervisory mechanisms. Large organizations, almost the same, and mid-sized organizations are organizations that still have a significant amount of revenue, but there's a little amount of governance, risk, and compliance in those companies. They're still examining, they still need to do something about it, but there's not a dedicated team. And there's little awareness, and most of the time there's no CISO or a virtual data protection officer or any dedicated staff. But most of the time they are regulated, but they're not aware of it. But typically something like GDPR, all of these companies are subject to GDPR, or at least most of them, but they don't know it or they don't act on it. And then we have small companies, 1 to 50, and this is in terms of absolute amount of numbers, quite a significant amount of companies. So we're going to dive a little bit deeper into the demographics and the amount of companies that we have in the European region. I'm going to look at the biggest countries: France, Germany, Spain, Netherlands, Italy, and Belgium. And if we're looking at the absolute number of amount of companies active in these industries or actively in these verticals, then you see that these are millions of companies. In the absolute amount, there's 31 million companies that need to adhere to some form of regulation, meaning that they are not aware of it. They need to be helped because they don't have a dedicated staff. So this also provides us with a big opportunity, also because of the regulator is incapable of regulating this by themselves, so they need help. So if we're looking a little bit deeper in, for example, in the Netherlands, to tech-reliant companies that are active in the fintech industry. So this is a vertical in the smaller section that we just had. So this is between 0 to 100 employees. You see there are many companies out there that need to be or are subject to any form of regulation, both GDPR as well as DORA or any other act. They are still under supervision of these AFM or DNB. So this is only in the Netherlands for fintech. If you do the same slicing and dicing for for example, medtech, govtech, insurtech, edutech, you'll find the same amount of smaller companies in need. So this is just an example. But the example to peel it off is looking at who suffers here. So who is actually the victim of all these regulations or potential cyber threats that are coming at these companies, and who needs to be helped? Those are typically start and scale-ups, most of the time acting in tech, so medtech, fintech or insurtech, and are most of the time the owner of the company that carry the accountability of needing to adhere to these regulations. And there are a couple of other needs, basically because if they don't adhere to the regulation, they lose their license to operate. And this nowadays also, and this is the last publication that we saw in the Financiële Dagblad, is that cryptocurrency companies are exiting because of all these regulations. And this is where they need help. And this is also where Anove can provide you with help. But I'll show you how we do this in a very easy and explainable manner. But to give you first a little bit of theoretical view on an organization that might help you looking at how does the Anove technology work and how does it work in both small organizations as well as large organizations. So I most of the time use this Van Som's model that you basically make a distinction in strategic level, tactical and operational level. Most of the time the chief security officer acts on the strategic level, is a challenging partner for executive management, sets directions, for example, a new framework or a new way of working, implements it in the organization, and at some point collects the evidence from the operational tactical level to generate, for example, a control statement to see to what extent the company adheres to all the regulations that and standards that the company needs to implement. So again, this goes for small companies as well as big organizations. So a typical example here to provide from a virtual CISO perspective some strategic guidance is via the information security policy or the strategy, and that's being directed to this organization and to the operational levels. Most of the time this is translated in all sorts of information or directives needed on all these organizational levels, and I have here some examples where typically on a strategic level, board becomes more and more interested in the performance of the security function. So they don't care about all the operational activities that you are exploiting or doing in lower level of the organization. No, they're mainly focusing on the outcome. So they're looking at, okay, how well do we do it? To what extent can we save money? To what extent can we save resources? So on the operational level, you want to extract all this operational data and parse that to a higher level, ideally in a real-time state. So it doesn't make sense to look back and report on what happened over the last couple of 5 or 6 months because that's all past. No, you ideally want to do it real time. Similar like with your bookkeeping, you want to report real time your cash flow, your cash positions, your liquidity, your debt status, your credit status, etc. So we do that real time. We're already used to that in the financial industry, and the same is going to happen here. Real time evidence-based management. So we've distilled based upon this for the Anove technology a very simple concept. So the virtual CISO and the virtual DPO can work with a couple of things, and we refer to GET. First of all, we start with goal setting. So what is important for a virtual CISO or virtual DPO is you first set the goal. So again, regardless if the company is large or small, you ideally want to set the goal. Meaning, what are we going to do? And we're not going to list 100 things, we're going to list 2 or 3 items that we really want to achieve. And what's the scope? So again, for example, for DORA or NIS2, it doesn't matter, the entire company doesn't have to be DORA or NIS2 compliance. It's only relevant for a small portion of production processes or value stream that contribute to the products that are subject to DORA. So this is the goal setting. In the analogy here with the bike lane is that, are we going to focus only on the street, or are we going to focus on the city, or are we going to focus on the province? That means scoping, to also set the right expectations. And after that, we're going to enforce the things that we want to do in the organization. You want to enforce it and delegate it with risk owners, control owners. So it's not that you do this yourself. As a virtual CISO or virtual DPO, you're basically delegating tasks and you make sure that everybody's doing it properly. And if not, that you correct and steer at the right course at the right moment to make sure that people are doing the right things and they're doing the things right. And if you have some point face an incident or something happens, that you're also capable of identifying quite quickly, okay, this is not a good practice, we need to change things and we need to make sure that we track and monitor the right things and that we're looking at the right stuff that we want to report on so that we have good visibility for, again, the board to take real ownership. So we are referring to GET. Setting goals, enforce them, and track them. So how do we do this in the Anove technology? So basically, this is a small demo of how it works. So you can manage multiple customers as a virtual CISO. In this case, I'm going to manage my bank, a smaller investment bank called Bink Bank. I can identify business units and departments. I can set my company settings here. So it depends a little bit on what industry you are, but you have different maturity levels or asset classification or risk management criteria. You can basically pre-configure that all because it's already in the technology, regardless of what kind of company you want to serve. You can also import, for example, existing frameworks that are out there. And in this case, we are going to work with the cyber fundamentals because that helps us improve the cyber resilience of our bank. So we are going to import it. This is just an example of a firm that we are going to help with implementing cyber fundamentals and the cyber fundamental framework. So I can do all sorts of things where I can, for example, map cyber fundamentals to other controls, but it basically initiates the initial setup for your customer to help them. So this is the first thing. And so you set up a goal and you set the scope. So in this case, we are going to help this Bink Bank with implementing cyber fundamentals because we want to adhere to specific regulations and we want to make sure that they are resilient. So for now, what we are going to do, we are going to look at how do we set the goals for this company. So again, I'm going to my customer. Oh, by the way, here I can create easily my new customer. So if, for example, I want to serve a new customer, I can easily create that here. I can tick the box if they are NIS2 or DORA compliant or need to adhere to that. And I'm going to start with, for example, here I'm going to show a little bit on how it works with the dashboard, but I'm going to start with the objectives. So I want to set goals. So it's easy for me to help Bink Bank with the first goal. The first goal is to establish a more cyber resilient company by the end of 2025, because I want to create a little bit of leeway and I want to make sure that the company is able to meet up to the goals within 1.5 years. And by doing that, we are going to implement cyber fundamentals by the end of 2025. Cyber fundamentals, by the way, is a good framework where you basically cover 85 of the cyber resilient actions that you need to take. The Anove AI engine helps me to set SMART goals, to make them more explicit, put them in time. I'm going to assign the owner, in this case the CIO, and I'm going to assign the business units that it's applicable to and the department that is mainly responsible for the execution. So in this case, the board of the Bink Bank. So this is my goal, and every quarter I can track my goals with the management board of the bank to see if we are still up to par. You see here the ultimate owner is the CIO, and I'm going to help the CIO in achieving this cyber resilience goal. I'm going to make a small task for myself, and that's hiring a virtual CISO. So that's good because I was already hired, and so the first task is already done. So this is a very simple example. So we go to the next one, enforce and delegate. So how do we do this in the Anove technology is by, first of all, I'm going to look at, okay, if I'm a bank and I need to adhere to multiple regulations as a bank, so in this case I need to adhere to approximately 2,699 requirements. I don't have a full coverage yet, so I have work to do, or at least me as a virtual CISO, I need to make sure that the people are going to do the work, and let me check what I need to do for the DORA Act. Or for DORA Act, I still need quite a lot of work because I'm covered for 47%, and I see that I need to delegate a lot of tasks to controls to the organization. On the left, you see the legal requirement. On the right, you can assign controls to that. But you see there are no controls assigned yet. But for me, it's easy. I can just assign these cyber fundamental controls to this framework. And I'm going to pick one as an example for you. And that is incident management, because incident management is typically something that is important for DORA. So if I'm zooming into this control, I can also add some operational evidence to it that the control is actually effective. And this is where we work with what we call evidence parsers. So the evidence, in this case, extracted from the Azure Sentinel logs. And I'll show you later on how much APIs we support to collect real-time evidence from your operations. And remember, in the visual that I've showed, the lowest level is the operation where you ideally want to extract all the evidence from. So tracking the activities of the company, what they're doing, I can easily do via the dashboard. And so we also have a function of where we quantify risk, where you basically can monitor the risk appetite of the company. I see the open risks, I can see my objectives, and I can see exactly who needs to take ownership of what kind of activities or risks. I can also zoom into, for example, again, I'm going to show on how far we are compliant to, in this case, DORA, or I'm going to show it now on Cyber Fundamentals because that's what we promised to implement, and you see we still have some work to do there. And I also see that some people in the organization did not add controls or tested controls. That means that I, as a virtual CISO, need to enforce them. I need to delegate the task clearly and need to enforce them that they're actually doing this work. But as promised to the board, I'm generating my in control statement because that's what I do every month or every quarter. And that's what I reproduce every time because I want to show outcome-based what we have achieved so far over the last period. And these in control statements become more and more important for also the regulator to receive from the company that they are adhering to this specific legal requirement, in this case the DORA Act. I'll show you a small example of what we do with the API. So I've mentioned to you that the controls are linked to operational or tactical processes, and by automatically parsing logs or ticketings, or at least showing that the operational processes actually exist and function up to par, this is where we then collect the evidence. So you see here an example again of the Azure Sentinel logs of incident management on critical bank processes. This is a thing that you do one time, and then you benefit from it from a long time because you don't have to search for evidence manually, and you don't have to collect the evidence from multiple sources. No, you just click on the button and you receive the eventual information. So, summary, goal setting and scope, enforcing and delegating, tracking and reporting. Basically similar like plan, do, check, act. And plan, do, check, act is basically implemented in the Anove technology. So how can we further support you as a virtual CISO or virtual DPO in your journey towards serving your customers and creating an understream of business? We help by providing a lot of tutorials and videos on how we work and how the technology works. And the intercom functionality in the application basically guides users or you through all the functions and all the required steps that somebody needs to take. For example, conducting a risk assessment in a simple way, or for example, filling in the processing register for the DPO, or doing control descriptions with the help of the Anove AI engine, where basically you are supported and helped to facilitate you in a super smooth process. Everything is automated, and that minimizes the manual intervention, and it also helps you to speed up the process for your customers. So basically the thing that you can do is once in a quarter or once in a month, you come to your customer and you help them, similar like what we explained as the accountant. So when you have the Anove Virtual CISO license, Virtual CISO license is not the pricing that you see here on the right bottom. These are end user pricing. So you as a Virtual CISO gets another pricing model, but you can charge the amounts on the right lower corner. So when you have your own Virtual CISO license, by this, you establish a long-term trustworthy relationship with your customer, basically because you also are able to upsell new services based upon the activities that you generate with the Anove technology. You can serve as many customers as you want. We see cases where 10 to 20 customers at the same time are served and charged on a monthly subscription. Basically, you're providing you with an understream of monthly recurring revenue, and you can basically do the work from anywhere at any time, depending if your customer requires you to be remote or requires you to be on location. And this will definitely also allow you to upsell more services, such as policy writing, risk sessions or trainings, or additional service like pen testing or auditing. It basically serves everything because you can import all the evidence of the activities that you do as a virtual CISO in the Anove technology, again, to prove also in terms of the audit. So let's see if we have some questions in the Q&A, because this is the end of the session. I'm going to open up the Q&A and see if there are questions. Good one. Can you have enough impact to help an organization if you are working part-time and remotely, given that security and legal obligations take up time? That's a very good one. Similar in line with the question that somebody asked me later on, do you think that this can be done on part-time basis where you actually have quite a responsibility? Well, I most of the time compare it to the owner of the company. So a board member is ultimately responsible for it, but he or she can appoint somebody that's responsible of doing the task. If you are an organization at a certain site and you can afford a CISO dedicated, so you have 100 to 200,000 euro per year available to spend on a dedicated security person, that's the moment where you potentially can have a full-time person. But what I personally experience is that a lot of CTOs and CIOs and CEOs of smaller organizations only want to do the minimum necessary activities, and they don't want to be burdened with a lot of additional work that sometimes security officers also bring to an organization because they want to be heard or want to be seen. So they bring most of the time more activities to the companies that are actually needed. So, and then we're talking about proportional security, where I think this is the role of a real expert, that you proportionally can dosage a little bit the activities to the company, and then still serve a customer where the owner of the company can take the legal obligation to the full amount. And basically you're there to help and to serve the organization to become compliant, because in the end, the legal obligation fully relies with the CEO or CFO or CTO, the owner of the company. What you also see nowadays in the US, for example, with the Federal Trade Commission and the Security and Exchange Commission, is that the board assigns a chief security officer, must be a dedicated staff, and must be on the payroll of the company, and they are also legally and financially liable if something happens. But these are very specific rulings that apply in the US and are not fully executed in Europe yet. I think that will come, but then we're talking about a whole other ball game. There's another question. That's not a question, that's a remark about coffee. Yeah, that's also important to bring enough caffeine to yourself and the organization to really get some energy in the organization. Another question that I received recently was, from a person who said, well, am I able to connect, for example, third-party risk assessment tools to the Anove technologies, like BitSight or companies that do third-party risk monitoring and parse the data. That's possible to do that. I think it's also a very important thing to do, because DORA, for example, requires that you do not only paper-based third-party risk management, but also digital third-party risk management. And basically, we don't care what kind of information you need from either a supplier or your own organization. We can ingest basically everything as long as it's related to a control, because we also assume, we do the assumption that every time that you want to prove a control, that you need to have some form of evidence which is extracted from an operational process or an operational technology, like logs from a firewall or configuration files of the firewall, or etc. Let's see if we have other questions. Now feel free to put your questions in the Q&A. And otherwise we are finalizing and wrapping this webinar up. No questions so far, huh? No. Okay, then I would like to thank you for your time. And if you are interested in either a trial license or an individual one-on-one demo, please contact our sales developers. They are also mentioned on the website. And I hope to see you in the near future face-to-face. Thank you very much for your time.